10. Tobacco, the plant that treats Parkinson's and causes lung cancer simultaneously. Tobacco does not need an introduction as a harmful plant. The lung cancer statistics are among the most documented cause and effect relationships in the history of epidemiology. Smoking is responsible for over 8 million deaths annually worldwide. The harm is not in question. Here is what nobody mentions in the same conversation. Nicotine, the primary alkaloid in tobacco, has a consistent and puzzling relationship with Parkinson's disease in epidemiological research. Smokers develop Parkinson's disease at roughly half the rate of non-smokers. This finding has been replicated across multiple large population studies on multiple continents. It is not a statistical anomaly. It is one of the most replicated inverse correlations in neurological epidemiology. The mechanism appears to involve nicotine's effect on dopaminergic neurons, the neurons whose loss defines Parkinson's disease. Nicotine activates nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in the brain in ways that appear to protect those specific neurons from the degeneration that characterizes the disease. Pharmaceutical researchers are actively working on nicotinic receptor targeting compounds for Parkinson's treatment that deliver the neuroprotective effect without the carcinogenic delivery mechanism. The plant that causes 8 million deaths annually from cancer, that also appears to protect against one of the most debilitating neurological diseases in existence. At the same time, in the same people. That is not a contradiction nature made by accident. That is a demonstration of how precisely the difference between medicine and poison can be embedded in the same molecule, distinguished only by how it enters the body. 9. Hemlock, the execution drug that is also a neurological research compound. In 399 BC, a jury of 501 Athenians voted to execute Socrates. The method of execution was a cup of hemlock, Conium maculatum, prepared as a liquid. Plato describes the death. The philosopher drank it calmly, walked around until his legs became heavy, lay down and died as the paralysis moved upward from his extremities to his lungs. Hemlock contains coniine, a neuromuscular blocking compound that causes ascending paralysis. The body shuts down from the bottom up. Consciousness remains while the ability to breathe is progressively eliminated. The most famous philosopher in history was executed with a plant that grows as a common weed in disturbed soil, roadsides, and garden edges across Europe and North America. It looks like cow parsley. It looks like wild carrot. People have confused it with edible plants and died. Here is the research angle that changes the conversation. Coniine and related alkaloids in hemlock have been investigated in neurological research for their potential application in conditions involving neuromuscular overactivity, specifically certain types of spasticity and movement disorders, where the neuromuscular blocking effect that makes coniine lethal at high doses could, at carefully controlled microdoses, reduce the excessive muscle activation that causes disability. The compound that paralyzed Socrates is in neurological research papers about treating movement disorders. The execution drug and the potential medicine are the same molecule at different concentrations. Hemlock is not a plant to find, prepare, and experiment with. The margin between a microdose and a lethal dose is not something a person should estimate at home. This is a plant for understanding, for knowing what it is, what it does, and why it represents the most serious version of the warning that runs through every entry on this list. Nature does not grade on a curve. Socrates was one of the wisest men who ever lived. Cannabis, the pain medicine that science keeps confirming and policy keeps complicating. Cannabis sits on this list not because it belongs in the same toxicity category as hemlock and belladonna, but because its dual nature as healer and harmer is among the most politically complicated and scientifically nuanced stories in modern medicine. The healing side first. Cannabidiol, CBD, has been demonstrated in clinical trials to significantly reduce seizure frequency in certain forms of treatment-resistant epilepsy. The FDA approved a CBD-based medication called Epidiolex for this purpose. THC and CBD together have documented efficacy for chronic pain, nausea from chemotherapy, and muscle spasticity in multiple sclerosis. For patients with terminal illness, cannabis provides comfort when little else does. The hard side is more contested, but not absent. High-potency cannabis use in adolescents is associated in longitudinal studies with increased risk of psychotic disorders in individuals with genetic predisposition. The relationship is not simple. Not everyone who uses cannabis develops psychosis, and causality is difficult to establish in population studies. But the association is consistent enough across enough research to be taken seriously. Cannabis also impairs driving at a level comparable to alcohol in certain testing conditions. Chronic heavy use is associated with a condition called cannabis use disorder, dependency with documented withdrawal symptoms in a proportion of regular users. The same plant, anticonvulsant medicine that gives children with catastrophic epilepsy their lives back, and a compound associated with increased psychosis risk in genetically susceptible teenagers. Both of those things are true simultaneously. The politics decided which truth to emphasize. The science contains both. 7. Arnica, the bruise healer that cannot touch a wound. Arnica montana, is one of the most widely used topical healing plants in the world. Arnica gel and cream are sold in every pharmacy. Athletes use it for bruising and muscle soreness. Clinical trials have confirmed that topical arnica reduces bruising, swelling, and inflammation from blood trauma with measurable effectiveness. The helinalin in arnica inhibits NF-kappa B, the master inflammatory signaling switch, with genuine potency. Take it internally, and the same helinalin that reduces inflammation externally becomes a significant toxin. Nausea, vomiting, cardiac arrhythmia, organ damage at sufficient doses. Arnica is classified as unsafe for internal use by most regulatory bodies, with the exception of highly diluted homeopathic preparations. But here is the less commonly known boundary. Arnica should not be applied to break-in skin, only intact skin. Arnica's compounds enter the bloodstream at a concentration that can cause systemic toxicity, the same effect as internal ingestion, arrived at through a different route. The directions on arnica packaging say, "Do not apply to broken skin." Most people read that line and think it is a liability statement. It is a pharmacological warning. The skin barrier is the thing separating therapeutic topical application from systemic toxicity. Remove the barrier by applying it to a wound, a rash, or any area of compromised skin, and the protection disappears. Healer on intact skin, toxin on broken skin. The condition of the surface you apply it to determines which outcome you receive. 6. Nutmeg, the Christmas spice that causes hallucinations and organ failure. Nutmeg sits in your spice rack. It goes in eggnog. It flavors baked goods. It is so thoroughly domesticated as a baking ingredient that its presence in a kitchen raises no concern whatsoever. In amounts larger than normal culinary use, nutmeg causes one of the most unpleasant hallucinogenic experiences documented in recreational drug literature. The compound responsible is myristicin, which metabolizes in the body to a compound chemically similar to MDMA. The experience it produces is not comparable to MDMA in any positive sense. Users describe intense anxiety, racing heart, extreme dry mouth, a dissociative confusion that is deeply uncomfortable, and a duration that extends to over 24 hours in some accounts. In larger amounts still, nutmeg causes myristicin toxicity, liver damage, renal stress, respiratory depression. There are documented deaths from nutmeg poisoning, predominantly in cases involving children who ingested significant amounts accidentally, or adolescents who consumed it deliberately. The medicinal history of nutmeg includes genuine applications, antimicrobial properties, traditional use for digestive complaints, documented anti-inflammatory effects at normal dietary doses, and historical use in small amounts as a sleep aid. The spice rack to the emergency room pipeline exists with nutmeg in a way that it does not exist with black pepper or cinnamon. The amount that flavors a holiday recipe and the amount that sends an adolescent to the hospital are separated by less than most people assume. The most domestic plant on this entire list, that is also a hallucinogenic toxin. In your kitchen, right now. 5. Aconite, the most poisonous plant in Europe that heals and kills with equal efficiency. Aconite, Aconitum napellus, is called monkshood in gardens where it grows as an ornamental for its dramatic purple hooded flowers. It is called wolfsbane in the mythology, where it kills werewolves. It is called the queen of poisons in toxicology, where it occupies the position of most poisonous plant species in Europe. Aconitine, its primary alkaloid, acts on sodium channels throughout the body. It causes a burning, tingling sensation wherever it contacts tissue, beginning within minutes of ingestion, or even skin contact with the sap. Then it causes arrhythmia, then paralysis, then respiratory failure. There is no antidote. Treatment is supportive, managing the cardiac and respiratory effects while the body eliminates the toxin. and survival depends entirely on how much was absorbed and how quickly treatment was reached. It has been used as a murder weapon. Japanese assassination history includes aconite. European poisoning cases include aconite. It is untraceable by the smell or taste of food it is mixed into. The burning sensation it causes can be attributed to the food itself. It was used deliberately to kill people with enough sophistication that some historical sudden deaths attributed to other causes may retrospectively involve aconite. And yet, in Chinese traditional medicine, aconite root, processed through a specific prolonged cooking process that partially degrades the aconitine, has been used therapeutically for rheumatic pain, cardiac conditions, and cold pattern conditions for over 2,000 years. The processing is essential. Improperly processed aconite kills. Properly processed aconite is, by the consistent documentation of Chinese medical practice, therapeutic. The most poisonous plant in Europe that is also a 2,000-year-old therapeutic ingredient in one of the world's oldest and most sophisticated medical traditions. If you find it growing in a garden, do not touch the sap. Admire the flowers from a respectful distance, and understand that you are looking at one of the most precise examples on this list of how thin the line between medicine and murder can be. 4. Opium poppy, the plant that gave medicine morphine and the world an opioid crisis. The opium poppy, Papaver somniferum, has shaped human history more profoundly than any other plant on this list. Morphine, derived from opium, transformed surgery and pain management. Without it, operations that are now routine would be unendurable. Codeine, hydrocodone, oxycodone, fentanyl, all synthetic or semi-synthetic descendants of the same plant compound. The pain relief is real. The dependency is equally real. The opioid crisis that has killed hundreds of thousands of people in the United States alone over the past 2 decades is the harm side of the same plant chemistry that makes those same compounds the most effective pain medications in human history. The mechanism that makes opioids work, binding to mu-opioid receptors in the brain and activating the endorphin pathway, is the same mechanism that produces dependency, tolerance, and the withdrawal syndrome that makes opioid addiction one of the hardest forms of dependency to treat. Pharmaceutical companies understood this and distributed opioids with marketing that minimized it. The plant's chemistry was not the original sin. The original sin was pretending the harm side of the ledger was smaller than it was. Morphine has saved incalculable suffering. The opioid crisis has caused incalculable suffering. Both of those things trace back to the same white latex in the seed pod of a garden flower. The flower did not choose its consequences. The people who scaled it without respecting its full chemistry did. 3. Mistletoe, the Christmas decoration that is in cancer clinical trials. Mistletoe hangs over doorways at Christmas. People kiss under it. It is a holiday decoration so domesticated that most people do not know it is a parasitic plant that grows by embedding itself into the branches of trees and extracting their nutrients. The berries are toxic, particularly to children. Ingestion causes nausea, vomiting, bradycardia, and in sufficient quantities, cardiac arrest. Every poison control center gets mistletoe calls every December. It is that regular. The decorative holiday plant is a reliable cardiac toxin in its berry form, and its lectins, compounds called viscotoxins and mistletoe lectins, are currently in clinical trials as cancer treatments. Iscador and Helixor, standardized mistletoe extract preparations used in integrative oncology, have been administered to cancer patients in Europe for over a century, pioneered by Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophical medicine. The clinical evidence is complicated and contested, but it is not absent. Mistletoe extracts have shown immune-modulating effects, direct cytotoxic effects on cancer cells, and in some studies improvement in quality of life and survival when used alongside conventional cancer treatment. The active compounds responsible for the toxicity to cardiac function in berries are related to the compounds being investigated for cytotoxic activity against cancer cells. Cytotoxicity, the ability to kill cells, is the harm side against healthy tissue and potentially the healing side against malignant tissue. The same mechanism aimed at the right target. A holiday decoration that sends children to poison control every December and is simultaneously being used in cancer treatment protocols in European hospitals. The plant does not change. The context determines the outcome. 2. Yew, the churchyard tree that gave medicine paclitaxel and gave history its poison arrows. The yew tree, Taxus baccata, grows in churchyards across Britain and Europe with a consistency that is not accidental. Yew is extraordinarily long-lived. Some British yew trees are estimated at over 4,000 years old. They predate the churches built beside them. They were sacred in pre-Christian Britain, and the churches were built near them deliberately, absorbing their sacred status. Every part of the yew, except the fleshy red aril surrounding the seed, is lethally toxic. The taxine alkaloids cause cardiac arrhythmia and cardiovascular collapse with a speed and severity that made yew the poison of choice for suicide in pre-Roman Celtic Britain, for poison arrows throughout medieval Europe, and for cattle deaths in pastures where yew hedges are maintained today. And in 1971, researchers discovered Taxol in the bark of the Pacific yew tree. Paclitaxel, the pharmaceutical name, went on to become one of the most important chemotherapy drugs ever developed. It works by binding to microtubules and dividing cells and preventing them from separating correctly during cell division. Cancer cells, which divide far more rapidly than most normal cells, are disproportionately affected. Paclitaxel is now used to treat ovarian cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, and Kaposi's sarcoma. It has extended millions of lives. The taxine that causes lethal cardiac arrhythmia and the Taxol that treats breast cancer come from the same tree. Not from related trees. The same species, the same ancient churchyard plant that Celtic warriors put on their arrowheads is the one that chemotherapy patients receive through an intravenous line. The 4,000-year-old churchyard tree. Poison arrow source and cancer chemotherapy origin. Both descriptions are accurate. Both are incomplete without the other. 1. Digitalis, the heart drug that is also the heart killer. Digitalis earns the #1 position not because it is the most toxic plant on this list. Water hemlock is more violently toxic. Aconite is more rapidly lethal. Belladonna has a more dramatic history. Digitalis earns #1 because it represents the fullest, most documented, most consequential expression of everything this list has been building toward. For over 200 years, since William Withering published his paper in 1785, physicians have been using digitalis to keep failing hearts beating correctly. The mechanism is understood precisely. The dosing is established by decades of clinical experience. The therapeutic window, the range between effective dose and toxic dose, is one of the narrowest in all of pharmaceutical medicine. A dose that brings a heart into correct rhythm sits a small margin away from a dose that throws it into fatal arrhythmia. Patients on digoxin today have their blood levels monitored regularly, not because physicians are being cautious, because the therapeutic window is narrow enough that factors as ordinary as dehydration, a change in kidney function, or a new medication can shift a patient from therapeutic to toxic range without warning. Digitalis toxicity killed patients in Withering's era when the dosing was being established empirically, meaning by watching patients and adjusting until the results stopped killing people and started saving them. Some of those adjustment patients did not survive the process. The knowledge that keeps today's cardiac patients alive was built on the deaths that preceded the understanding. That history, the deaths that built the knowledge, the narrow window between healing and harm, the 200 years of careful calibration that separates a functioning heart medication from a poison, is the complete story of every plant on this list, compressed into one. Nature provided the compound. Human observation established where the line was. Every death that happened on the wrong side of that line paid for the knowledge that protects the patients on the right side. That is not romantic. It is not comfortable. It is the actual history of how plant medicine became pharmaceutical medicine. And it is the reason that the answer to the question this video's title asks, heal you or harm you, is always the same, depending entirely on what you know and how carefully you use that knowledge. 10 plants. Every single one of them capable of saving a life. Every single one of them capable of ending one. Here is the only conclusion that this list supports. There is no such thing as a harmless plant. There is only a plant you understand and a plant you do not. A dose you have calibrated and a dose you have estimated. A preparation that preserves the medicine and one that concentrates the poison. The people who developed modern medicine did not start in laboratories. They started in fields and forests and gardens, watching what plants did to human bodies over hundreds of years of trial and observation and death. The knowledge they accumulated, the knowledge that became pharmacology, that became the drug dosing standards, that became the contraindication lists on every medication ever manufactured, was bought at a price that we do not adequately acknowledge. When people dismiss plant medicine as primitive, they are dismissing the source of over half of all pharmaceutical drugs currently in use. When people embrace plant medicine as automatically safe because it is natural, they are ignoring the cost at which the knowledge of how to use it was established. The honest position is in the middle. These compounds are real. The mechanisms are real. The healing is real. The harm is equally real. And the line between them is drawn by knowledge, specific, careful, dose-aware, interaction-aware, preparation-aware knowledge that cannot be replaced by enthusiasm or by the word natural on a label. Learn the plants, respect the chemistry, and never forget that the same hand that offers medicine can, with a different amount, extend something else entirely. Subscribe if this made you think differently, drop a comment with the plant that surprised you most, and share this with whoever in your life is most convinced that natural means safe. The plants on this list have been correcting that assumption for thousands of years.